and it is the Saturday Coffee Klatch with Heather Lofthouse and yours truly, Robert Reich. And we have a guest today. I'm not going to reveal that right away, but just to get into the first topic, Heather, we had a New Hampshire primary this week, and a lot of people say that Donald Trump won. But why do they say Donald Trump won when he only won by 11 and a half points? I mean, he is the, in terms of a figure, he was president. He was president, and he's
Right.
kind of an effective incumbent president. That seems to me very poor showing, doesn't it?
Well, and you said in your Substack, which we have to reference, that independents were up for Haley more than we thought, rather than Trump. That was an interesting loss. And also Biden, 70 plus thousand, 9,000, 6,000 write-ins. I mean, love to see that as well.
Well, I think the reality is that the independents, who make up half of the voters in America, really don't like, they don't like this man, this crazy man named Donald Trump. I mean, they know how completely nuts he is. And this is actually a good point to bring in our guest. And our surprise guest today is one of the best Congress people we have. He's a progressive, a co-director and co-head of the Progressive Caucus. He was the co-chair of Bernie Sanders' campaign. He's an author. He wrote a lot of books. I mean, the most recent book that I read was The Digital Age, dignity in a digital age. Well, his name is Ro Khanna. Ro, welcome to our Coffee Klatch. I hope you have your coffee with you.
I do, Bob. Thank you to you and Heather for having me on. I haven't written nearly as many books as you, Bob, but I admire your prolificness, not as an author, but going from forum to forum. And congratulations to you and Heather on having a great podcast. Already a big success.
Well, thank you. And you are a big success. And we want to talk to you about what do you think about what happened in New Hampshire? I mean, am I wrong in saying that actually it was a defeat for Trump, given that he is the effective incumbent and his notoriety? I mean, how can you explain being so badly, having such a bad performance in New Hampshire?
Bob, you're absolutely right. You actually made a point which I think not enough commentators have said, which is the reason Trump is actually winning is he was the former president. Being president gives you a huge advantage in these primaries. And the fact that 40 to 5% of folks are still voting against you is a big warning sign for November. There was all these stories about, is the Democratic coalition going to be unified? Let me tell you, I was up in New Hampshire for 2 days campaigning all over for the president, and he got votes from Bernie folks, Warren folks, Buttigieg folks. The party is absolutely unified around him. Trump is the one who has a bigger problem. He's got all these moderate Republicans, pro-choice Republicans, independents for saying, I'm never going to vote for him. And I don't think there's been a sufficient attention at how hard it's going to be for him to put together a winning coalition.
Well, he is probably, let's face it, he's probably going to get the nomination. I think it's going to be very hard for Nikki Haley. But when he gets the nomination, I mean, he does face a crowd of people, many of them Republicans, many of them Republican moderates, as you said, and all these independents who don't want him to be president. So I'm not paying any attention to these early polls at all that are showing him doing very, very well against Biden. Are you in South Carolina right now or heading there?
I am. I'm tonight going to be speaking at the big First in the Nation convention that the state party is doing. The president's going to be there. Jim Clyburn's going to be there. And I'm going to be making the case why progressives need to rally around this president. And I'm optimistic. Look, Bob, you remember, because we're both students of politics, that John Glenn was meeting Ronald Reagan at this time in 1983, early 84. So these polls are meaningless as a hypothetical. And I think what New Hampshire shows is that when the election actually comes, when it's an actual choice, people rally around the president. I think we can't take it for granted, but if we do our work, I'm confident we will win.
No, I was just going to say, let's not be smug about it. Let's not take it for granted. Heather, I want to let you get in here, too.
I just wanted to get your sense on what was scary and the beginning of something big, I'm sure, which was this AI voice replicating what was supposed to be President Biden calling people up and saying, no need to vote today, just wait for the general. And, this is AI, this is a synthetic voice, it's deep fake, it's not good, and it's scary. I wanted your opinions on that.
It's a big problem, and this is why we need AI regulation. I mean, there should have been a disclosure if something is a non-human voice. There should be guardrails in not being able to impersonate someone with false information, but we haven't had that regulatory agency. And in the absence of that, I would say to the tech companies, don't allow this AI to be used for electioneering. Look, there are constructive possible uses. In India, for example, candidates are using it to have different dialects, and there are 26 dialects, and they're translating it into different dialects. The problem is because we have no regulation, because we have no safety, there is such potential for abuses. And so I would say there should be a prohibition until we get the regulation there of using this kind of tool to mislead voters.
When a member of Congress says there should be a regulation, something in the back of my brain. I've been in Washington. Ro, what do you do? I mean, honestly, as a practical matter, you're there in the middle of everything. We all agree with you. I mean, deep fakes. There's a lot of danger here. What, as a practical matter, do you do?
Well, one simple thing we could do or pass should be that if there is an AI-generated image, if there is any AI-generated content, it should be clearly labeled that it's AI-generated. And that is something the president's executive order says, okay, tech companies should do it voluntarily. But we haven't been able to get Republicans to come to the table on legislation on this. Now, in fairness, even when the Democrats were in charge, it was hard to get tech legislation through. It just hasn't been as much of a priority for Congress. But the reality is this technology can be causing extraordinary disruption in our democracy, and it's getting people addicted, young people addicted to these platforms, causing thoughts of suicide, eating disorders. I mean, we need basic regulation. I'm going to keep pushing for it, and hopefully more leaders will recognize it's a priority. We got to get it done.
Well, let me just recognize for you and for everybody who's listening, you are the representative of Silicon Valley. You are the person who is Mr. in a way, big tech in Congress.
Yep. 17th district, right?
I mean, we're relying on you, Ro, to convince all of these companies that they have a certain social responsibility here.
Well, they certainly need to do better than they did in 16 and 20. They took some steps, but I think candidly that we have to convince these tech companies to do better, because there's not going to be legislation that passes before November. And our hope is that they're going to realize that this should not be taking place. Now, the good news is when Dean Phillips, who was one of the challengers to the president, had a AI bot that he was trying to deploy, OpenAI came and said, look, that's banned. We don't want to have this until the technology is properly safeguarded. So my hope is that the tech companies are going to be cautious, but we need to continue to push on them to do that.
Right. And I actually really, you did an op-ed you wrote an op-ed in the New York Times about this, and how what can we learn from globalization, how that affected the middle class. AI is happening. Let's get ahead of it. Let's include workers in the conversations intellectually, financially, with shared profits. One thing you said in that op-ed was, will our first trillionaire be generated by AI generation? And I think it's so interesting. This Oxfam report came out. In the next decade, we expect our first trillionaire. Let's remember that is a million millions. That is what a trillion, that's how many zeros a trillionaire has. I mean, that's wild to think about.
Now, do we think that first trillionaire is going to be Jeff Bezos or maybe Mr. Musk?
But what's amazing to me is that this is an ambition of people in the Valley. Right. I mean, you think, what more are you going to do with the money? But, it highlights the vast economic inequality that we have, which is our big challenge. And AI is just one manifestation of it. But the reality is that so much of the gains of globalization, technology have gone to the capital class. Now, I'm for a wealth tax for these billionaires and multimillionaires, and I often say, how is this a hard vote for any other district? I've got more of them in my district than anywhere, and $10 trillion of market value. But the story is pretty simple. The wages of working and middle class at best have stagnated, even if they've gone slightly up for other people not in the bottom 20, 30%. You've had huge costs of healthcare, huge costs of education, huge cost of childcare. So discretionary income has gone down. And at the same time, you've got people in Silicon Valley, New York doing extraordinarily well. This is just not sustainable for democracy. You can't have a situation like this.
Well, I think
and so this brings us to our next topic, which
is
yeah, preaching to the choir. This is our next topic, which is the economy. I mean, if we have one more report of how great it's doing, so unemployment down, jobs up, consumer sentiment up, consumer confidence up, the growth up. I mean, things are going.
The economy grew 3.1% last year and 3.3% over the last 3 months of last year. And we also know that rents, the median rents, have dropped for 8 months in a row. I mean, if I were president, I'd not only be crowing about this and be very happy about it, but if I were a constituent, if I were a voter, I would be saying to myself, Joe Biden is actually presiding over one of the best economies we've seen. But do voters believe that?
Well, the president deserves credit. It's not just happenstance that this happened, right? The American Rescue Plan actually puts money in the pockets for the first time of working class and middle class folks. That's why we have seen the economy be as resilient, even with interest rate hikes, because Joe Biden said, I'm going to invest in the working and middle class. He invested in infrastructure. He invested in manufacturing. That's why unemployment has been at record low levels. And the president should make it clear how his policies have led to this result. It wasn't inevitable. But then taking a page, in my view, from FDR's famous speech in 1936 when he ran for re-election, he should say, I have done all this and I'm going to continue to do it. But for 50 years, there's been an assault on the working and middle class. I understand why so many people feel the American dream has slipped away. I understand why the cost of the big ticket items, childcare, education, housing, are still too high. I understand why we still need a long way to go to have high paying, good paying jobs. And I'm not going to rest. I can't even change this in forget 4 years or 8 years. This is going to a decade's project to rebuild the working and middle class. And here's what I'm going to do to continue on this progress. And my sense is that's what we're going to hear from the president in a State of the Union coming up on March 7th.
Well, from your lips to Joe Biden's brain, I hope you're absolutely right. Because that's exactly what he needs to say. I mean, the distressing thing, honestly, has been that there is this kind of dissonance of great economic news, but a lot of people out there, certainly people I talk to and the polls back me up, are just saying, well, yeah, a lot of new jobs. I've got 3 of them. Or the economy may be going gangbusters, but my own personal economy is not going all that well. Or if they're a young person, they say, I can't afford housing and I can't afford childcare. So I think you're absolutely right. He's got to get ahead of this. He's got to talk about what he's going to do for, kitchen table economic issues that people face.
I've been traveling so much, I can't remember exactly which place I was in, but I've done this a number of times where you go in, you ask a group of folks in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, do you believe that the American dream is stronger today, or do you believe that the American dream was stronger 30 years ago? And if you ask people that, many hands go up saying it was much stronger in the past, and they feel like the American dream is slipping away. Now, we've made extraordinary progress on race, on gender, but the reality is that we have not done enough for the working and middle class in this country. And we still, of course, have progress to make on race and gender. But we have to understand people's frustration, their fear that their life is not going to be as good as it used to be, that their kids' life isn't going to be as good as it used to be. Donald Trump comes in and takes this and combines it toxically with race. And he says, you know what also used to be the case back then? There were less immigrants. It was less diverse. Let's go back. And people say, I want the economic security. It's our job to say you can have that economic security, economic prosperity, and we can have a future multiracial America. And if we don't appreciate people's anger and sense of loss we're never going to be able to win them over. And so, yes, let's talk about Biden's policies working, not as crowing about his achievements, but as proof case that this is the direction we need to continue to go in.
That's an important point. And you mentioned the word fear. I mean, I think that a lot of the reason that the Republicans are pushing this fear of immigrants and the notion that the border, it has to be, militarized and that Biden is failing on the border has to do with this age-old fear, this kind of nativism that Republicans have been. Well, it's not new. The nativism has been a Republican product for years. But when it actually tips over to xenophobia, which we're seeing under Donald Trump, and we saw under Donald Trump, and we're seeing now Donald Trump pushing it again, it's very worrying. I mean, you're in the House, and at least the Senate looks like it, and Senate Republicans look like they might be willing to come up with a border solution which would free funds for Ukraine. But House Republicans seem absolutely adamant. Is that your impression?
They're absolutely adamant, and especially with Donald Trump telling him we don't want a deal because he wants to run on this issue. They have dug in. Here's, I think, Bob, though, what's so important. I mean, the Donald Trump has injected into the political debate that immigrants are poisoning the bloodstream, that immigrants are the problem. I think the Democrats have to start with a very simple point, that immigrants enrich America, that this nation of immigrants leads to ambition and renewal and hard work, and appeal to John F. Kennedy and appeal to Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, who made the case that actually immigrants are enriching. Because if we just accept the frame that immigration is a problem, we're arguing on the wrong turf. I think we want to be aspirational. And then we say, of course, we want a secure border. Of course, we want a orderly process. One of my favorite stories, Bob, quickly, is Mario Cuomo, and he imagines what his parents would have said when he came to Ellis Island. And the Ellis Island interviewer asks his mother, what do you do? And she says, I don't have a job. What does your husband do? He's a ditch digger. What's your education? 8th grade. His education, about 8th grade. Well, what are you coming to America? Well, we want opportunity. What's your expectation for your son? Oh, nothing, just that he'd become governor of New York. I still hear that, and it sends chills down me when I hear it. America is an aspirational country. We've got to defeat Trump by giving an aspirational vision of what this country is.
I think that the aspirations, the idealism of America is so connected to immigration. I mean, that's, after all, I mean, look back, most of us came from immigrant families. Some of us came from immigrants who didn't want to be immigrants, actually were forced to come over here as slaves. But most of us actually were coming here because of opportunity, and we were being, facing harsh violence in many places of the world. And Emma Lazarus's poem on the Statue of Liberty, give me you're tired, you're huddled, you're poor, yearning to be free. Well, that is the aspiration. That you're 100% right. We should be talking and reminding people of that.
Now, it would be amiss if we didn't talk about all the horrible wars happening around the globe right now. And I know that you, Congressman Ro, may I say Ro? We're on.
Please, Heather, of course. We're having coffee here.
This is informal. This is informal. So, Ro, I mean, you came out and I think it was in The Nation, another op-ed where I read it, where you said, it's not okay to go and bomb the Houthis without getting congressional approval. So it's so interesting to have you here instead of just Bob and me, which, by the way, is also fun. But tell us, what is happening? I mean, from your point of view and how you're seeing it and what is happening around the globe, what's being done right and where's there room for improvement?
Well, the Houthis who are in Yemen, they're not good actors, and they're, of course, disrupting these ships, commercial ships and naval ships on the Red Sea. But let's just remember, I mean, they're one of the poorest countries in the world. And so you have America, the strongest, greatest country in the world, and we're bombing Yemen. And it's one thing to say, okay, we did it once because there was some imminent attack against naval ships or commercial ships, and the president had to defend it. But now we've done it 4, 5, 6 times. And the president has called the UK and Canada and Australia. There's a reason that the Constitution says you have to come to Congress. He has to make the case. And one of the things, if we debate it, that we'll realize is that the Saudis were bombing the Houthis in Yemen for 7 years, and it made no difference. And still, the president has said that it hasn't made a difference. And my belief is it's a complicated situation, but we have to give diplomacy and statesmanship there a try, which is how do we get a release of hostages and a ceasefire to de-escalate some of the tensions that are in part animating the Houthis? How do we have a truce in Yemen where the Houthis have some role with the Saudis and involve our Gulf allies? At the very least, though, we should come to Congress so we don't inadvertently get into another war in the Middle East.
Aren't we already kind of in a world war in the Middle East? I mean, Iran is behind the Houthis. I mean, that's where a lot of the money and financing is coming from. Iran is behind Hezbollah. A lot of this is coming ultimately from Iran and Hamas as well. So how do we contain this kind of incipient Iranian world war?
Well, I think first we try to de-escalate this immediate situation in Israel and Gaza. I mean, look, Hamas was a terrorist organization that struck Israel on October 7th. I think Israel had every right to pursue Hamas perpetrators. And like in Munich, they should get every single one who was responsible for that brutal attack. But the reality is now there have been over 20,000 Gazans, women and children killed, many of the homes destroyed. We have to figure out how to bring that war to an end with the release of hostages. And we have Will Burns there with the Qataris. I'm hopeful he's going to come through with a breakthrough. If we have that ceasefire, that doesn't solve everything, but it begins to de-escalate. And then we need to sit down with the Houthis and UAE and Saudis. The Saudis and UAE have a relationship to try to deal with the Yemen situation. Iran is the most complex. And look, President Obama with the JCPOA, part of the strategy was to make sure that Iran wasn't a bad actor in the region. Trump comes in and he takes all of that away. He has a maximum pressure campaign. Well, how has that worked out? How has that maximum pressure campaign worked out? I would argue Iran has actually done more harm with the Hezbollah and with the Houthis. And so there has to be some a diplomatic approach. Not that Iran is a good regime, but if you don't want to get into war with them, we need some approach that's going to ratchet down the tensions. It may not be the JCPOA, but we can get some agreement short of that. And that, my fundamental view is that the American people don't want another war with Iran. They don't want us to be in war in the Middle East. They rather us be investing in education, childcare, housing here at home. And they don't want $1 trillion Pentagon budget.
Well, that's exactly what I hear from everybody. And my students, though, Ro, what they are telling me now is that, they really are upset that Joe Biden has been so close to Netanyahu. They're upset that the United States continues to fund this war that, as you said, 25,000 Palestinians in Gaza, 10,000 children killed so far. I mean, can Joe Biden, and why is he not, let's put it this way, saying we need a ceasefire and we have to have, and Israel is going way too far?
Well, he should say that. I've called on him to say that. But here's what I say to young folks. I say there are many people like me, more progressive than the president. In fact, I was criticizing the president on the Yemen strikes the night before I went to New Hampshire to campaign for him. And they said, well, why are you campaigning for him? I said, well, one, the alternative on the Middle East, if you think that Donald Trump is going to come in and bring peace in the Middle East, you're just factually wrong. I mean, we saw it 4 years ago. He's going to give the far right in Israel a total green light. There's not going to be Palestinian justice or a Palestinian state. The second point I make is that Joe Biden and the White House recognize that there's this younger generation that they need, and their voices matter, and they're being heard. And I think you've seen a shift in the president's own rhetoric and his own policies in putting more and more pressure on Israel to minimize civilian casualties. And the final point I say is, look, I am so hopeful, actually, about this country. And what gives me hope is the young kids, the kids in their 30s and 40s, and they get it on climate, they get it on racial justice, they get it on economic justice. They get it that America has to do far better in terms of our foreign policy ideals, and the dignity that we want for people here should be the dignity everywhere else. And that generation, I want to give them a chance. But let me tell you, if Donald Trump is there, it's going to be a much longer road for them to be able to be in governance and have their vision. So let's get Joe Biden elected. Let him be the bridge president to a progressive future. And then we need all of you to run for office and shape us in a more just direction.
Well,
yeah. Young people are having a hard time hearing that, but I do think that there's time. There's time between now and the general.
I'll tell you what I don't, what we shouldn't do is just engage in sort of platitudes. I love young people. I love Gen Z, or, young people are the future. No, these are substantial folks. They know their issues in and out. They want to talk about Willow. They want to talk about the climate policies on the LNG export terminals. They want to talk about Gaza. And what I think young people respect is honesty. And when I go to young people and I say, look, here's the deal. We've got 62 people in Congress for a ceasefire. Keep coming to Congress. Get that to 100. We can have an influence on the White House, but we need your voice, and don't disengage and don't have it go to Donald Trump. Treat them with respect, because they get this politics and they get the issues.
Well, that's absolutely right. And also, anybody who says, I'm not going to vote for Biden, and I'm certainly not going to vote for Trump because I'm tired of voting for the lesser of two evils, is not paying attention. Because if they think that way and they would otherwise vote for Biden, they are helping Donald Trump. We've kept you over time. Heather, do you have any more questions, any more comments, thoughts?
I mean, millions, but we've all got to go about our days. I mean, Ro's off to South Carolina. Bob, you're probably going to write some more Substacks. I mean, if I was a betting gal, that's what I would say. We often like to end with something light, God forbid. What are you all watching on TV?
Obviously, the 49ers, they're going to be playing the Lions, and they're in my district. I've been following them all year.
You're so predictable.
Oh, nice.
Bay Area, Well, I want to say
Bob?
that I've been watching the Emmys, and I think The Bear, talk about a great series. It embodies everything we've been talking about in terms of American idealism and aspiration and entrepreneurship and hard work. So watch The Bear.
Yeah. I've been watching The Diplomat, which is Kerry Russell's in it. I think the acting is solid. I'm into it. And then Slow Horses, I just started. I like a noir, dark crime drama. So those are my offerings.
And that's going to be that's the uplifting end, that noir.
That's good recommendations.
I mean, it is uplifting. We've come far.
Listen, Ro Khanna, thank you so much for joining us. And everybody out there, thank you for joining us. And we will see you next Saturday.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Bob.